Major funding for KPBS Evening Edition has been made possible in part by Bill Howe Family of Companies, providing San Diego with plumbing, heating, and air restoration, flood and remodeling services for over 40 years. Call 1-800-BILL-HOWE or visit billhowe.com. And by the Conrad Prebys Foundation, Darlene Marcos Shiley, and by the following. And by viewers like you. Thank you.
Victims of the January 22nd floods in San Diego have to find a new place to stay and on their own dime. Thank you for joining us. I'm Maya Trabulsi. Funding for the county's emergency temporary lodging program expired today. Unfortunately, the Board of Supervisors says this last extension would be the last. KPBS Metro reporter Andrew Bowen says some are already falling into homelessness.
This is my skincare. Okay, we all need skincare. These are my shoes, my slides.
Ashley Manzano isn't carrying much as she checks out of her family's room at the Comfort Inn in Chula Vista. She's been staying here for the past 5 months. On January 22nd, she was home with her grandmother when the downpour started. And the floodwaters started rising fast. She had to flee with her grandmother to her neighbor's roof. It was terrifying, and she's been struggling with PTSD, anxiety, and depression. It's hard just looking at what's left of her family home in South Crest.
The walls are broken down, and that's about it. There's no drywall put up. It's just when you just empty out your whole house and the inside. So it still needs a lot of work. I know what FEMA provided my family. My mother said it's not enough.
Manzano was housing insecure before the floods. The stress of the past few months has taken a toll on her family relationships. So she's going to be couch surfing with a friend 100 miles north in Ontario while she figures out her next move.
So this is what was a good home, just knowing you're safe. But I feel like we weren't really fully rested, especially people whose family members, they passed away. They're still, not having to cope with that because they still have duties to do at home.
The county government's $4.2 million for hotel vouchers are now spent. The San Diego City Council recently voted to provide another $3 million in emergency assistance for flood victims. But faced with a brutal and unforgiving housing market, some are falling through the cracks. Andrew Bowen, KPBS News.
Many local organizations have been working to help flood victims, not least of which is the Harvey Foundation. Since January, the Harvey Foundation has been helping victims through donations, home repairs, and more. At a meeting in National City today, our media partner KGTV spoke to flood victims who say they have nowhere to go and still need help.
When they give you this deadline, it's like you're not going to just sit there and wait to get thrown out. If they're like, you need to check out in a week, you're going to take action. You're going to do something. So yes, 100%. There's people who never left and who have returned to flooded homes while they're damaged, incomplete. There's not very many homes that have been completely redone at this point.
The Harvey Foundation says it's working to have 10 more homes ready to move in today, but they still need help with volunteers and with donations. If you would like to help, you can find more information on the Harvey Foundation website, theharveyfamilyfdn.org.
Well, we have a warming trend. It's going to be a hot weekend, especially inland. In the meantime, tonight we'll get a little bit of relief down to 60 in Ramona, 73 in Borrego Springs, a warm night in the deserts, but 63 into Mount Laguna, and we'll be in the low to mid 60s along the coastline. There are heat advisories in effect through Saturday and into the interior, an excessive heat watch for the deserts, places like Coachella and into Borrego Springs in through next week. We'll talk more about the details ahead.
Over the last decade, California lost half of its recycling centers, which means fewer opportunities for people to recycle their bottles and cans. That is alarming from an environmental perspective, but there is also a financial impact. It's now much harder for people to get back their bottle deposits. And KPBS investigative reporter Scott Rodd joins me now to discuss how the state is planning to transform how we recycle in the coming year. Scott, welcome.
Thanks for having me.
So to start, you published an investigation this week into the decline of recycling centers. Tell us what you found.
So to start, let's talk about California's bottle deposit program. When you go to the store to, say, buy a soda, you pay for the soda, but then you also pay a nickel or a dime if it's a bigger container, and that that payment's supposed to be a deposit, not a fee, and you're supposed to get that money back when you return your bottles and cans. But with recycling centers closing, we found that the recycling rate has also dropped. So we wanted to figure out, where is all of that money going? And we found that the state has a fund that has increased significantly in recent years. And as of last year, we were able to confirm that there was $820 million of unclaimed bottle deposits in this fund, a lot of money. And advocates and experts we spoke to said that's concerning for a number of reasons, but one of them is that state leaders have had a habit of going to this fund and borrowing money from it when the state budget is a bit tight. So they've borrowed over the years billions of dollars. Now that money has always been repaid, but at times it's created a strain on the fund.
$820 million. That really is an incredible number. But the state now has a plan to overhaul how people are recycling cans and bottles. And that's going to require some investing in the way that the infrastructure is set up. What changes are they looking at?
So they want to put more money in kind of newer, novel recycling approaches, like having mobile recycling centers that may be moving around on different days of the week, perhaps reverse vending machines, which are those machines that you put your bottles and cans in and you'll get your deposits back. They also want to change the role of retailers, and they want to have retailers essentially set up kind of cooperative recycling centers where people can go in their neighborhood if they don't have a recycling center, where they can drop off their recyclables and get back their deposits.
So what are recycling advocates saying about all of this?
Well, they're saying that these newer approaches like mobile recycling centers, like reverse vending machines, they play a role in this whole recycling ecosystem. But they said at the end of the day, what's most important are these traditional recycling centers. They worked 10 years ago. They got the recycling rate up above 80%. And they're saying more effort, more energy and money needs to be put into those traditional recycling centers and get those repopulated throughout the state.
So for the viewers who are watching your story and want to do their part and find themselves in these recycling deserts, what can they do?
So they can rely on their curbside blue bin system, which is, a very effective way to recycle. Of course, the companies that run those programs, they're the ones who are getting the nickels and dimes back. It won't be the people recycling, but at the very least, those containers will see a second, third life. They can also, if they would like to see those deposits returned, they can separate their bottles and cans and they can leave them separately in a bag beside their dumpster or in an alleyway to make sure that someone can take those and recycle them and get a deposit back. And then they should be on the lookout starting next year and in the coming years for those changes that we talked about. Mobile recycling centers, reverse vending machines. Ideally, if all goes according to plan, there should be more of those opportunities popping up in people's neighborhoods.
I hope so. Thanks so much for your reporting, Scott.
Thank you.
I'm William Brangham. Tonight on the NewsHour, the Supreme Court upholds a gun control law that prohibits domestic abusers from owning guns. Coming up at 7 after Evening Edition on KPBS.
If you own a home, you've likely noticed the cost of living has spiked. A recent study by Bankrate.com found the cost of owning and maintaining a home has jumped 26% in the last 4 years. Jen Sullivan looks at what homeowners can do to help lower their monthly bills.
It's been a long-time American dream, owning a home. But the high cost of ownership is making that dream unaffordable for many. Even as inflation overall cooled slightly last month, home expenses continue to rise. According to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, shelter expenses, which measures home costs, rose for a fourth month in a row and are up 5.4% year over year.
The homeowning population of the U.S. definitely skews towards more affluent Americans.
Jeff Ostrowski is an analyst at Bankrate.com. The company released a survey looking at hidden home ownership fees and found the yearly cost for a typical single-family home has topped $18,000. That's 26% higher than 4 years ago. To get to that number, they looked at the average costs of property taxes, homeowners insurance, home maintenance costs, electricity, and internet and cable bills. They found the average American is now paying an additional $1,510 per month on top of their mortgage payment.
As a longtime homeowner myself, I constantly complain about how much I'm spending on on repairs, plumbers, electricians.
To help lower those costs, Atrowski says homeowners should compare different home insurance rates to get the best deal. He also suggests buying a home that was built more recently.
If you're buying an older home that's 50, 60 years old, even if it's been inspected, you're going to be constantly running into new repairs.
The bad news is, experts say these high home costs aren't likely to go away anytime soon. For Consumer Watch, I'm Jen Sullivan.
San Diego, things are slightly better depending on your neighborhood. SDSU's Mira Kopik has insight into some new numbers in the Friday Business Report.
Rents have declined in San Diego. Rent is one of those critical components in the inflation equation, which has been stubborn on a national basis. Rents are up nationally, but in San Diego, they declined versus last year about 1.3%. It doesn't sound like much, but really arresting that decline, it moved us from the 7th most expensive city to the 8th most expensive city. So let's peel this back just a little bit, because rent isn't declining throughout the city. It's changing in some areas that might be surprising. The first part is in, the average rent for a one-bedroom apartment declined 1.3% to about $2,300, close to $2,400. Now, we're seeing rents in expensive areas like Coronado or Encinitas. Coronado rents dropped almost 15%, and Encinitas rents almost 14%. But in much more affordable areas like National City or El Cajon or Vista, those rents have gone up. So depending where you live in the city, so National City rents went up almost 10% versus a year ago, Vista over 7%, and El Cajon over 4%. So what we're seeing is that demand for more affordable housing is very, very high. What we're seeing is a little bit decline in demand for, moderate to luxury type of housing and condos. And if you look at what builders have been building in San Diego, especially condos for rent or apartments, it's really been in that moderate and luxury space.
The first presidential debate is less than a week away now, and it could be a make or break moment for both President Joe Biden and former President Donald Trump. It is a showdown that's been months in the making. Julia Benbrook gives us a look at how the two candidates are preparing.
President Joe Biden is gathering with trusted aides at Camp David for several days of intense debate prep. His sessions are expected to evolve from informal discussions about topics, questions, and potential responses to more formal 90-minute mock debates.
Looking for Biden to give the same performance he did in the previous debates, but also to do what he did in the State of the Union, which is to surprise expectations.
Among those helping Biden get ready is the president's former chief of staff, Ron Klain, who has been working with Democratic candidates for decades. Former President Donald Trump's aides insist he will rely more on interviews and rallies to hone his approach.
I'm not underestimating him. I assume he's going to be somebody that will be a worthy debater.
But he is leaning on some of his top contenders for vice president, including Senators J.D. Vance of Ohio and Marco Rubio of Florida, as well as policy experts and outside allies to help brief him.
I think the former president needs to practice with his team, particularly on how he may respond to some difficult questions, maybe about January 6th, maybe questions about some of the legal issues that he currently faces.
In recent weeks, Trump has participated in roughly a dozen of these private meetings his team refers to as policy discussions. The first debate is scheduled for June 27th at 9 p.m. Eastern in Atlanta. Reporting in Washington, I'm Julia Benbrook.
On the heels of the first tropical storm this hurricane season, alarm bells are ringing over the status of FEMA's disaster relief funding. National correspondent Lee Waldman explains some are worried the money could run dry as storms continue rolling in.
Summer has just started, but we've already seen extreme heat, wildfires, and the first named storm of the season, Alberto. These disasters are impacting millions, and now some lawmakers are expressing their concerns that federal disaster relief funding could run out when it's needed the most. Along the Texas coast, Tropical Storm Alberto brought torrential rains and storm surge. Despite wind damage and flooding, some are counting themselves lucky it wasn't worse.
I mean, in some ways, maybe this is good. because obviously this problem was going to happen eventually anyway.
Just last month, NOAA released its predictions for what they're calling an above normal and potentially historic 2024 Atlantic hurricane season.
The forecast for named storms, hurricanes, and major hurricanes is the highest NOAA has ever issued for the May outlook.
With that on the forecast, Florida Senators Rick Scott and Marco Rubio sent this letter to the FEMA administrator expressing their concerns about access to dollars aimed to help people impacted by these storms. That money comes from the Disaster Relief Fund, which is used to help pay for things like debris removal, repair and restoration of damaged public infrastructure, and hazard mitigation. FEMA's latest monthly report from May 31st paints a grim picture. Latest predictions show a majors balance deficit of over $1.7 billion by August, jumping to more than $6.8 billion by September. In a statement, a FEMA spokesperson stated the agency is working to ensure sufficient funding.
We asked the FEMA spokesperson if they've issued a response to the letter issued by Scott and Rubio. They only said they're in receipt of the letter and it's currently under review. It's important to note that the majors balance deficit was released before the wildfires destroyed approximately 1,400 structures in New Mexico. There's no telling at this point how that could impact the disaster relief funding. In New York, I'm Lee Waldman.
A proposed new city in California has some people concerned. The plan is to build it in Solano County on farmland, but leaders question how to supply water for the hundreds of thousands of people who would live there. Ashley Sharp has the details.
It's a new promise Tuesday from California Forever, hoping to calm water worries surrounding their proposed new city.
Experts have confirmed we have a diversified portfolio of water sources that won't impact the water sources or supplies of any of the surrounding cities of Solano County.
Bronson Johnson of California Forever says by better managing the groundwater and surface water already on the 60,000 acres of farmland they own, they have more than enough water to support the first 100,000 residents.
So there's no chance that it would turn up that you guys don't ultimately have the right to use that water?
Yeah, that's correct. These are fully secured water rights.
But with a plan to grow to a city of 400,000, they also have to prove now there's enough water to do so, even during drought. In order to scale, they say they'll buy water rights from owners outside the county, recycle wastewater on site, and work to better replenish existing groundwater.
We're concerned about the water.
Benicia Mayor Steve Young sits on the Solano County Water Agency Board and is opposed to the new city, backed by Silicon Valley billionaires.
They don't want to necessarily follow the rules, which tech guys, that's sort of how they roll.
With the water plan, he wants to see more proof and less promise.
And while they have lots of money, it's the ongoing costs for the future residents long after this thing is built and they're gone.
California Forever met with fierce criticism from community members rallying against the plan.
What we're proposing to do is a big change, but it's a change for the good.
Of that, they have to convince Solano County voters, or they'll sink the plan this November.
Ashley Sharp with that report. California Forever claims its proposed new city will be affordable, walkable, and home to an economic engine that could be similar to Silicon Valley. The Prisoners of War Missing in Action flag is one of the most recognizable military symbols of the Vietnam War era. It also holds significant meaning in San Diego. Today, a new memorial was unveiled at Star Park Circle in Coronado. It honors the League of Wives, women who took extraordinary measures to ensure their husbands and hundreds of other prisoners of war were brought home.
These women came forward and defied the government by going national in what was happening with their spouses, and they sought the humane treatment and eventual release of their spouses. These women actually created the POWMIA flag that we see flown across the country today.
Among the 11 military spouses who attended the dedication ceremony was Mary Pat Mearns, and she is one of the last surviving members of the League of Wives. Hundreds of attendees wore pink to honor the pink outfit Sybil Stockdale, who lived in San Diego, wore when she addressed President Richard Nixon. SeaWorld today released a green sea turtle named Gigi in San Diego Bay. KPBS SciTech reporter Thomas Fudge says she was released a year after being found floating on the bay.
Gigi was released at the edge of San Diego Bay by SeaWorld staff who carried her in a sling, and she wasted no time getting into the water. The bay is Gigi's old home.
The bay, we chose this location because this is very close to where we rescued her.
Jenny Smith with SeaWorld Rescue points out that Gigi is missing her left front flipper, but she can still navigate just fine. She was rescued by marine biologists because she was floating on the surface in a way that looked like trouble.
She was very buoyant, and sea turtles need to dive to find their food source. So we took her in for x-rays, we took her in for a CT scan at the San Diego Zoo, and we found that she was just gassy.
The gas that was trapped in her intestinal tract was causing her buoyancy and making it hard to dive. Smith says they had several methods of treatment, which included taking her for a drive on a bumpy road. SeaWorld has 3 other sea turtles now in their care, one from San Diego Bay and 2 that lived in the open sea. SeaWorld's Nick Dinezzo says ailing sea turtles that are beached off the coast of Oregon sometimes end up at SeaWorld.
There's actually a really cool program called Turtles Fly Too. It's a partnership we have that they actually load turtles onto aircraft and fly them to places where they need to go. So they'll fly them down here for us to actually provide long-term rehabilitation and care.
San Diego Bay is home to a population of about 60 green sea turtles, and today one of them came home. Thomas Fudge, KPBS News.
Well, we're dealing with a hot weather pattern across the interior especially. It's going to be a steamy weekend, and there might even be an isolated shower or thunderstorm on Sunday afternoon, as there's a little bit of a greater injection of moisture into Southern California and much of the Southwest as a result of recent Atlantic tropical storm Alberto. Might be just enough to spark a couple of showers or storms, especially over the mountains. Desert heat is going to hold next week. Some of us will find a little bit more variety from day to day, but the heat is locked into the coast, or the heat is locked into the interior deserts, I should say. The coast will be dealing with the cooler air for sure. Tonight we'll get down to 64. Low clouds near the coast. Each morning we'll see a little more cloud cover near the coastal areas, and then we'll have a brighter afternoon. 110 degrees, hazy, hot, and sunny out there into Borrego Springs. Mount Laguna will be a place of relief there in the high ground at 77. Also some 70s, upper 70s, but 70s nonetheless near the coastline. So there are the heat advisories through Saturday in the orange, just a little bit inland away from the city, and then into the deserts. An excessive heat watch is in effect into next week. So let's watch this moisture here. You can see it's pretty robust into New Mexico. Saturday, again, as we move on through the day, just a little bit of a hint of cloud cover, mainly in Arizona. But we'll be watching into Sunday when a little more of this moisture begins to nudge into our area. You can see just a suggestion for an isolated downpour in a few spots here. We're not expecting much. Overall, into next week, we're going to get a little relief in the Northeast after what has been a hot time there, but the heat's building into the interior Southwest, and we're just locked in here in the deserts through next week. So the coastal areas are going to get warmer. You can see, look at this Sunday forecast back into the low 80s, Monday low 80s as well, and then we'll get a little bit cooler into midweek. We're expecting to stay dry for the most part on Sunday in the city and into the inland areas around 90. The heat backs off a little bit into the midweek forecast. Into the mountains, we're going to be a little breezy, and again, still mostly sunny, but there's a small chance for an isolated downpour late Sunday in a few areas in the high ground. A little cooler Monday and Tuesday, then warmer again on Wednesday. And into the deserts, you can see we're just locked around 109 to 112 consistently. For KPBS News, I'm AccuWeather meteorologist Jeff Cornish.
Young poets are inscribing their words on the pavement of a City Heights alley. KPBS reporter Katie Heisen visited the public art project, unveiling this Saturday.
Can you hear me? The words of Samira Hassan's poem surround her feet.
The Spaniards now wear blue and black, their faces still white.
She wrote it to the Kumeyaay people. She relates to their struggles with displacement and policing.
They continue to shoot down the rail-tail hawks, leaving their bodies for the soil to soak up. They continue to place the black ravens in cells, watching them closely, never allowing them to peek at the skies that their flocks once soared.
Hassan's family immigrated from Somalia. Almost half of City Heights residents are foreign-born. Rising rents are pushing them out.
Our people's graveyards no longer exist. They've built their homes over it. Our families no longer live here. I know you're angry, so am I.
Now 19, Hassan used to roller skate this alley outside the rec center. She tells herself one day she'll return to the nearby house her family can no longer afford.
I took my first steps in that home. I learned how to read and write in that home. So it's really heartbreaking every time I drive past it. I always tell myself I'm gonna come back and I'm gonna buy my childhood house.
Now, she and 4 other City Heights poets are leaving a message that will stay, even if they can't.
My poems and poems that describe me, my community, my womanhood, my blackness, and aspects of my dreams literally plastered, like permanently plastered on this walkway. That's just like, I can't even comprehend that.
They cut thousands of letters from road material and burned them into the pavement. Now anyone who walks on this piece of City Heights will be faced with its history. Katie Hyson, KPBS News.
One way to stay caught up with KPBS News is with the San Diego News Now podcast. It's an easy way to stay on top of the news of the day with new episodes every weekday morning. And you can find tonight's stories on our website, kpbs.org. Thanks for joining us. I'm Maya Trabulsi. Good night.
Major funding for KPBS Evening Edition has been made possible in part by Bill Howe Family of Companies, providing San Diego with plumbing, heating, and air restoration, flood and remodeling services for over 40 years. Call 1-800-BILL-HOWE or visit billhowe.com. And by the Conrad Prebys Foundation, Darlene Marcos Shiley, and by the following. And by viewers like you. Thank you.